$1.25 million. That's the number. Not the dream number. The math number. The amount a person needs invested in a diversified portfolio returning roughly 7% to generate $50,000 a year without touching the principal. Most passive income content on the internet skips this number entirely, or buries it, or rounds it down to something more palatable. This video won't do that. This video starts with the number and works backward to show why it's real, why it's larger than almost everyone expects, and why the phrase passive income might be the most misleading term in personal finance. If you've ever imagined a life where the portfolio covers everything and the alarm clock becomes optional, the math in the next 16 minutes will reframe that image permanently. Last video we built 3 portfolios with exact tickers: VTY, VXUS, BND. The tools are in place. I'm Warren. Today's question is the one that comes next. Can those tools replace a paycheck? The short answer is yes. The honest answer is not as soon as the internet suggests. Tomas heard the phrase passive income for the first time on a podcast during his commute on the Lakeshore Drive Express bus in Chicago. He was 31, working as a claims adjuster for an insurance company, earning about $63,000. The podcast host described a life where money arrived while you slept, where the portfolio generated enough to cover rent and groceries and travel without a single hour of work. Tomas pulled out his phone at a red light and typed, "How much do I need to live off investments?" The first result said $500,000. The second said $750,000. The third said $1.2 million. 3 answers, no agreement, no explanation of how each number was calculated. He closed the browser and felt further from the answer than before he searched. The confusion Tomas felt is the starting point for this video, because the range of answers reflects the range of assumptions, and most passive income content never discloses the assumptions. The dream version uses optimistic math. The real version uses the 4% rule, which is the closest thing to a standard that retirement research has produced. Here's where it comes from and why it matters. In 1998, 3 professors at Trinity University in Texas published a study that analyzed every 30-year retirement period in American stock market history, going back to 1926. They tested various withdrawal rates against different portfolio allocations and measured how often the money lasted the full 30 years. The finding? A 4% annual withdrawal rate, adjusted for inflation each year, survived in roughly 95% of historical 30-year periods. That's where the 4% rule comes from. It's not a guarantee, it's not a law. It's a historical observation that says, if a person withdraws 4% of their portfolio in year 1 and adjusts that amount for inflation every year after, the money has historically lasted 30 years, roughly 19 times out of 20. That's the best number retirement research has. And if you've seen a different number on a blog or a podcast, it was probably calculated using different assumptions, a different time horizon, or a different definition of success. Now, the math that most people skip. If the target lifestyle costs $50,000 a year, and 4% is the safe withdrawal rate, the required portfolio is $50,000 divided by 0.04. That's $1.25 million. Not $500,000, not $750. $1.25 million for a $50,000 lifestyle, which, for context, is below the median household income in the United States. The dream of living off investments isn't impossible. It just requires a portfolio size that most people dramatically underestimate. And this is where the gap between the internet version and the math version becomes dangerous, because the internet version makes people feel like they're close when they're decades away. If someone wants to run this calculation for their own situation right now, the formula is simple. Take annual expenses, not income, but actual yearly spending, and divide by 0.04. That's the portfolio required. If spending is $40,000, the number is $1 million. If it's $70,000, $1.75 million. If it's $100,000, $2.5 million. The number scales linearly and doesn't negotiate. Most people who hear this formula for the first time react the way Tomas did, staring at the screen while the concept they'd been building in their head quietly collapses. Tomas ran this calculation on his phone the next morning while waiting for the bus on Lakeshore Drive. Coffee from Dunkin' in one hand, phone in the other. $63,000 in annual expenses divided by 0.04, $1.575 million. He stared at the number. He had about $41,000 in his 401k and a Roth IRA with $6,000. Total, $47,000. The gap between where he stood and where the math said he needed to be was $1.5 million. On a $63,000 salary, and even at an aggressive 20% savings rate invested at 7% average annual return, it would take roughly 23 years to close that gap. He'd be 54, not 35, not 40, 54. That's the first crack in the dream. The timeline. Passive income content on the internet often implies a 5 to 10 year runway. The math says 20 to 30 years for most people earning under $100,000. Run the numbers on any specific salary and see. Those two numbers, the implied and the calculated, are the reason so many people start, feel like they're failing, and stop. They're not failing. They're measuring against a fantasy timeline that was never grounded in arithmetic. But the 4% rule has a second problem that's even less discussed. And for anyone planning to retire before 60, this one matters more than the portfolio size. Inflation. The 4% withdrawal is supposed to be adjusted for inflation each year. If inflation runs at 3%, a $50,000 withdrawal in year 1 becomes $51,500 in year 2, $53,045 in year 3, and so on. By year 20, the annual withdrawal has grown to roughly $90,000. The portfolio needs to not only survive the withdrawals, but grow enough to fund increasingly large ones. In periods of high inflation, like the late 1970s or the early 2020s, this adjustment eats into the portfolio faster than expected. The 4% rule survived those periods in the historical data. Barely. And it survived them by assuming the person didn't panic and sell during the down markets that accompanied the inflation. There's a third layer that almost nobody in the passive income space mentions, and it's the one that should concern anyone planning to stop working before the traditional retirement age. Sequence of returns risk. This is the risk that the market drops significantly in the first few years of retirement, when the portfolio is at its largest relative to withdrawals. A person who retires with $1.25 million and withdraws $50,000 in year 1, only to see the market drop 25%, now has a portfolio of roughly $880,000. They still need $50,000 in year 2. But the base has shrunk by a quarter. The portfolio now needs outsized returns just to recover, while continuing to fund withdrawals. In the historical data, the worst outcomes for retirees were not caused by low average returns over 30 years. They were caused by poor returns in the first 5 years, when the portfolio was most vulnerable. Same average return, different sequence, radically different outcome. For anyone thinking about early retirement, this is the risk that deserves the most attention. Not stock selection, not fund choice. The sequence of returns in the first 5 years. And there's no way to control it because nobody knows what the market will do in any given 5-year window. The only defense is a larger portfolio than the minimum, which adds years to the timeline, or a willingness to reduce withdrawals during down markets, which requires flexibility most people haven't planned for. Tomas found this concept on a financial planning blog 3 weeks after running his original calculation. He said it was the first time the passive income dream felt genuinely fragile. Not because the math doesn't work over long periods. Because the math assumes the person can survive a 30% drop in year 2 of retirement, without selling, without panicking, and without changing the withdrawal. That's not a financial skill. That's a psychological one. And it's the skill that separates the 4% rule in a spreadsheet from the 4% rule in a human life. Here's the reframe, and it's the reason this video exists in a series that's been building toward action, not doubt. Passive income is real. It works. The 4% rule is sound over 30-year horizons for people with diversified portfolios. But calling it passive is misleading because the income isn't created passively. It's created by decades of active saving, active investing, and active discipline. Every dollar in the portfolio that eventually generates passive income was earned through labor, directed through the pyramid from video 7, automated through the routine from video 8, and protected through the rules from video 9. The income is passive. The construction of the machine that produces it is anything but. And if you've been told otherwise, the person telling you was selling something. A more accurate term would be deferred active income. The person works now, saves now, invests now, endures market drops now, resists lifestyle inflation now. And 20 or 25 years later, the accumulated result produces income without additional labor. That's real, that's achievable. But framing it as passive, as something that happens without effort or significant time, misleads people into thinking the timeline is shorter, the portfolio requirement is smaller, and the risk is lower than it actually is. The entire passive income industry, the courses, the podcasts, the YouTube channels with thumbnails showing people on beaches with laptops, depends on that misleading framing. Because nobody buys a course titled How to Work for 23 Years and then maybe stop. But that's the honest version. There's a connection here to Video 3, the high-income trap. The surgeon earning $420,000 a year, spending $406,000. Even at that income, the passive income math takes time. The surgeon's savings rate determined the timeline, not the salary. A person earning $60,000 with a 20% savings rate reaches the passive income threshold faster than a person earning $300,000 with a 3% savings rate. That math broke people's intuitions in Video 3. It breaks them again here from the other direction. Passive income isn't a reward for high earnings. It's a reward for a high gap between earnings and spending, maintained long enough for compound interest to do its work. Tomas is still on the bus, still working at the insurance company, still 31. But the number on his phone changed what the word retirement means to him. It stopped being a fantasy about beaches and laptops. It became a specific number, 1.575 million, with a specific timeline, roughly 23 years at his current savings rate, and a specific vulnerability, the first 5 years after he stops working. He doesn't find this depressing. He said the opposite. He said clarity removed the anxiety because the anxiety came from not knowing the number. The unknown was scarier than the number itself. Once the number existed, the problem had a shape. And a shaped problem is a problem that can be solved, even if the solution takes 2 decades. He also said something that connects to Adriana's index card from Video 9. He wrote the number on a post-it note and stuck it to the frame of his bathroom mirror. 1.575 million. He sees it every morning while brushing his teeth. Not as motivation, as orientation. The number tells him where the system is pointed. Everything else in his financial life, the split deposit, the 401k match, the Roth IRA transfer, runs automatically. But the number on the mirror reminds him why. Every person in this series has built a piece of the machine. The pyramid, the routine, the rules, the portfolio. Today's video is the stress test. The question of whether the machine produces enough output to replace a paycheck and how long that takes, and what can go wrong. The answer is honest. It takes longer than the internet says, it requires more than the internet suggests, and the risks are real. But it works. For the person who builds the machine correctly and gives it enough time, it works. Here's the question this video leaves open, and it's one worth thinking about before the next one. If the portfolio required for full passive income is larger than most people expect, and the timeline is longer, does that change the goal? Or does it just change the strategy? Maybe the answer isn't to chase passive income as an endpoint. Maybe the answer is to build enough invested capital that work becomes a choice instead of a requirement. Not zero work, not a beach, just the option to say no. That number, the one where work becomes optional rather than mandatory, might be lower than 1.25 million. It might be 600,000 or 400. It depends on what optional means to the person asking. If you've been chasing the passive income dream as a destination, this is the moment to reconsider what you're actually chasing. Is it zero work? Or is it the power to choose? Because those two goals require very different portfolios and very different timelines. And the second one, the power to choose, might be closer than you think. 3 thresholds. 3 levels of net worth where the financial system starts treating a person differently. Better rates, better products, different conversations at the bank. That's the next video, the tiers most people don't know exist.